For 150 years, we thought we understood what dinosaurs were. Bones, stone shape. Scientists measured them, described them, classified them, and then they moved on. But a few decades ago, something happened that no one expected. Scientists started looking inside the bones. And what they found wasn't supposed to be there. Not a theory, a structure you can point to. Flexible tissue, molecular signals, chemical fingerprints that recorded metabolic intensity in animals that died 66 million years ago. And then slowly, a completely different picture started forming. Not just what dinosaurs looked like, but how they lived. How fast they grew, what their chemistry was doing, how their brains were organized, how they actually moved across the ground. By the end of this video, you will never look at a museum skeleton the same way again. Because the skeleton was never the whole story. It was just the part that survived. When the first dinosaur bones were formally described in the 1820s, scientists had a very logical assumption. The soft tissue was gone, the organs were gone, the chemistry was gone. What remained was mineral calcium phosphate, locked in rock shaped like the original bone, but containing nothing of the original biology. It was a reasonable assumption. For most fossils, it was true. And so for 150 years, paleontology became necessarily a science of shape. Bone proportions, tooth structure, socket angles, limb ratios. Brilliant work, rigorous work. But it had a ceiling. You could tell what a dinosaur looked like roughly. You could estimate how it moved, you could classify it, place it on a family tree. What you could not do was measure its metabolic rate. You could not read its growth history. You could not reconstruct how it experienced the world. Those questions, the biological questions, seemed permanently closed. Scientists weren't wrong to think that. Given the tools they had, it was the only reasonable conclusion. The tools changed. For most of the 20th century, the dominant assumption was straightforward. Dinosaurs were reptiles. Reptiles are cold-blooded, therefore dinosaurs were cold-blooded. They moved slowly, warmed themselves in the sun, grew gradually over decades. It was the foundation of almost every reconstruction ever made. And then, in 2014, a team of researchers published a paper in Science that quietly dismantled that foundation. The study, led by John Grady at the University of New Mexico, analyzed growth rates across hundreds of living and extinct species: mammals, reptiles, fish, birds. They measured how fast an animal gains mass before it stops growing, a property that correlates directly with metabolic state. The results were striking. Dinosaurs did not sit in either category. They were not fully warm-blooded like mammals. They were not fully cold-blooded like lizards. They occupied a middle zone, a metabolic state the paper called mesothermy. Elevated metabolism, active, running warmer than a crocodile, but not burning energy at the rate of a mammal. This was not a minor adjustment. This reshaped how every large dinosaur had to be imagined, from hunting behavior to daily activity range to habitat tolerance. But that was just the beginning. In 2022, a paper appeared in Nature that went further. Jasmina Weeman at the California Institute of Technology and her team used Raman and infrared spectroscopy to examine chemical signals preserved inside fossil bones, using in situ Raman spectroscopy and infrared analysis. Specific molecular signatures, oxidized lipids and proteins, leave different chemical fingerprints depending on whether an animal had bird-like metabolic intensity or reptile-level metabolic intensity. And the result? The earliest dinosaurs, the ancestral lineage that eventually gave rise to every tyrannosaur, every sauropod, every horned ceratopsian, showed fingerprints consistent with elevated bird-like metabolic intensity. Scientists are now measuring dinosaur metabolic intensity from chemistry preserved in fossil bone. That line deserves a moment. Not estimated, not modeled from living relatives, measured from chemistry locked inside ancient bone. If you had told a paleontologist in 1980 that this was possible, they would have told you it wasn't. There is something that happens inside bone while an animal is alive. Every year, growth slows slightly. A faint boundary forms within the cortical tissue, a line of arrested growth, almost like a ring in a tree trunk. Scientists have known about these lines for decades. But for most of that time, the data was difficult to collect and difficult to interpret at scale. In 2020, a team led by Holly Woodward at Oklahoma State University published a study in Science Advances that changed that. They collected growth ring data from a large sample of Tyrannosaurus rex specimens, ranging from juveniles to fully grown adults. What they found was not what most people expected. T-Rex grew slowly, much more slowly than had been assumed. The largest specimens, animals approaching 12 to 13 meters in length, weighing 8 or 9 tons, were not 10 or 15 years old. They were 28, 30, perhaps older. That means a T-Rex was still in what we might call early adulthood when it reached full size. It spent most of its life in an intermediate phase, growing, but not yet fully grown. And here is the detail that stays with you. Some of the most powerful predators that ever walked the earth were still teenagers when they died. Growth is metabolism made visible. Every ring in that bone is a year the animal lived. A year of hunting, of growth, of survival, recorded in tissue not as memory but as chemistry. Their bones were storing this data while they were still alive. Not a museum piece, a living record. The vascular canals inside these bones also carry metabolic information. Faster growth leaves more canals. Slower growth leaves fewer. The pattern is consistent enough that scientists can now use bone microstructure to estimate directly how much energy an animal was spending per day. Not from guesswork, from the tissue itself. The skeleton had been holding this information for 66 million years. We just needed the microscope to read it. In 1996, a small feathered dinosaur was pulled from mudstone in northeastern China. It was not the first theropod found with feather-like structures, but the quality of preservation was extraordinary. Filaments, bristles, dense integumentary structures covering the body. For years, the scientific debate circled around one question: were these structures for flight, for display, or for something more fundamental? The answer, when it came, was all three. But the one no one had fully anticipated was the third. Insulation. Evidence from early Cretaceous sites in northeastern China suggests that many small theropods lived in environments that were cold at altitude, sometimes well below zero in winter. Feathers arrived before flight, long before. They kept small-bodied, fast-metabolizing predators warm in environments that would otherwise have been lethal. And then, in 2008, a discovery at the University of Bristol turned the feather story into something even stranger. Jakob Winther, examining a fossil feather under electron microscopy, found something that had been dismissed as bacterial residue for decades. Melanosomes. Pigment-producing structures intact, preserved. And because the shape of a melanosome determines the color it produces, spherical for reddish-brown, rod-shaped for black, platelet-shaped for iridescent blue-green, Winther realized something remarkable. You could read the color of a dinosaur directly from the fossil. Subbase tone, pause. Not reconstructed, not guessed, read. Specific, repeatable, testable. The same pigment system that gives a crow its blue-black sheen survived in animals that died 125 million years ago. These structures were not decoration. Color carried information. It determined who attracted a mate and who did not. It signaled territory. It warned rivals. Color in this sense was not just biology. It was communication. And that communication had been sitting, encoded in fossil rock, for over 100 million years, waiting for someone with the right tool to listen. What scientists found inside dinosaur skulls almost restarted the intelligence debate from zero. For most of the 20th century, dinosaurs were assumed to be cognitively unremarkable. Large bodies, small brains, slow responses, simple behavior. It matched the cold-blooded, slow-moving model that had dominated the field for a century. CT scanning technology changed what was possible. By digitally rendering the internal cavity of a dinosaur skull, the endocast, researchers could reconstruct the approximate shape and proportional volume of different brain regions. And the picture that emerged was more complicated than the old model allowed. In 2023, Susanna Herculano-Husel, a neuroscientist at Vanderbilt University known for her work measuring neuron density in living animals, applied a method called the isotropic fractionator to estimate neuron counts in extinct theropods. The method uses body mass, brain volume, and evolutionary relationships to model neuron density. Her published estimate for Tyrannosaurus rex, approximately 3.3 billion cortical neurons. That is comparable to a baboon. This was not a peripheral result. It was published in the Anatomical Record and debated widely across the paleontological community. In 2024, a detailed critical response was published by multiple researchers. The authors argued that the method may not translate reliably from living mammals to extinct non-avian dinosaurs, that the neuron density assumptions used had not been validated across that evolutionary gap. The debate is ongoing, no consensus has been reached. But even the conservative reading of the endocast data tells a story. The olfactory bulbs in large theropods were disproportionately developed, suggesting highly refined smell. The optic lobes in some species were configured similarly to modern raptors, suggesting forward-facing visual processing, depth perception, and the capacity for precise tracking. These were not simple animals running on reflex alone. The question of how a dinosaur experienced the world, what it perceived, how quickly it processed information, whether it used memory in ways we would recognize remains open. But it is no longer unanswerable. We have the tools to ask it. And slowly, carefully, we are beginning to get answers. In 2002, John Hutchinson and Mariano Garcia published a paper in Nature that overturned one of the most persistent images in popular science. The image, a Tyrannosaurus rex sprinting. The paper showed, through rigorous biomechanical modeling, that for T-Rex to run at the speeds commonly depicted in film, approximately 40 to 70 kilometers per hour, it would have required more than 43% of its total body mass to be concentrated in leg muscles alone. That is anatomically impossible. The bones could not support it, the limb proportions did not allow it. T-Rex was fast, probably 12 to 25 kilometers per hour in sustained movement, but it was not an explosive sprinter. It was powerful at moderate speeds, built for control and efficiency, not a burst finish. But what made this paper landmark was not just the conclusion, it was the method. Hutchinson and his team built digital musculoskeletal models, virtual animals with calculated muscle volumes, attachment points and force vectors, and tested movement through simulation. This was a turning point. Since 2002, that method has become standard across the field. Every major limb reconstruction, sauropod neck posture, hadrosaur locomotion, ankylosaur tail dynamics has been tested this way. And every time, the results carry the same quality of surprise. Animals that looked slow were efficient. Animals assumed to be fast were restrained by physics. Body plans that seemed impractical turned out to be optimized for specific ecological roles that the skeleton alone had never revealed. The muscles were always part of the story. We just spent a century building museums without them. Step back for a moment and look at what has happened. In the span of roughly 30 years, paleontology has moved from describing shapes to measuring biology. We can now read the metabolic intensity of an extinct animal from its eggshell chemistry. We can estimate how many years it took to grow to full size from the rings inside its cortical bone. We can reconstruct what color it displayed to rivals or potential mates from the microscopic geometry of preserved pigment structures. We can model how it moved, test those models against physics, and reject the ones that do not hold. We can map the architecture of its brain and ask, carefully with appropriate uncertainty, what kind of sensory world it inhabited. Scientists weren't expecting this. When Mary Schweitzer found flexible tissue inside a T-Rex femur in 2005, the reaction from much of the scientific community was disbelief, not hostility, but the reasonable assumption that something must be wrong. When Winther found melanosomes in a fossil feather in 2008, the dominant interpretation for 20 years had been that they were bacterial contamination. When Grady's team published the mesothermy model in 2014, it required revising frameworks that had been stable for half a century. Each of these discoveries arrived the same way. Not with announcement, not with fanfare. With data that did not fit the old model. And each time, slowly, reluctantly, through rigorous testing and retesting, the old model gave way. That is how science actually moves. Slowly and then all at once. Dinosaurs are no longer just animals from another time. They are becoming biological models, organisms we can interrogate at the chemical, cellular, and mechanical level. That shift has already changed how we understand the origins of birds, the evolution of metabolism, the biology of growth, the history of color and display in vertebrate life. And it has barely started. The next dinosaur discovery might not come from a fossil bed. It might come from a museum drawer. A specimen cataloged for 100 years, waiting for a scientist to put it under a synchrotron or slice a thin section through its cortex or run its eggshell through a spectrometer. The tools exist. The data is there. Waiting. We spent a century learning what dinosaurs looked like. We are now in real times learning what they were. How they regulated metabolic intensity on a cold morning. How long it took a young Tyrannosaurus to reach the size that made it apex predator. What colors it displayed along its flank or crest. How many years it lived before it died. None of this was visible in the fossil a century ago. Not because the information wasn't there. Because we didn't yet know how to listen. The fossils were never silent. We just didn't have ears. And all of this, every measurement, every reconstruction, every chemical fingerprint, from a world that ended 66 million years before the first human drew breath. The skeleton was never the dinosaur. It was just the beginning.